there, and welcome to Leading Change Conversations, the podcast where we tackle real-life challenges with leaders like you to make organizational change a breeze. In this episode, we explore the art of motivating individuals across diverse age groups, young people as well, highlighting the pivotal role of communication in navigating our rapidly evolving world, where the looming presence of AI underscores the need for adaptability. So I am Ulrike and I train, coach, and inspire leaders and leadership teams to turn into successful change agents, to communicate with impact, and to lead with authenticity. So now let me introduce you to our amazing guest, Brian Cooklin. Brian was previously the founding principal of the North Anglia International School in Hong Kong. He has also been the principal of a British International School in Mexico City and of a school in his home country of Scotland. Since August 2020, he has been Regional Managing Director for the European region of North Anglia Education Group. So Brian is a popular conference speaker and workshop trainer, as well as the author of many articles for education journals and publications. As a keen public speaker and debater, his other claim to fame was appearing as a contestant on BBC's Mastermind quiz program. When we pre-discussed what we want to really discuss in this podcast, we said it's very, very important, and everything actually in the business world when it comes to leading change, also generational change that we're also seeing today, is about building relationships. So can you give us maybe first an introduction of that, why you think that this is the key thing, building relationships?
I think it's the key part because, first of all, I've always taken the view in any business, you need to know who you've got. In other words, sometimes we pigeonhole people with the job title and we think this is what they're capable of, this is what's on their CV. So, for example, in my first headship of a school in Mexico, the first thing I did was to interview the 285 staff individually. And when I did that, I found a really rich vein of talent and capability that wasn't being tapped into. And also, it helped me understand where those people were coming from. So, for example, I found someone in quite a lowly job who was actually a fully trained architect. And I immediately enlisted his help with expansion of the building. There was a teaching assistant who was a trained psychologist, and we didn't have one. And that was a tremendous asset in the school to support young people who had any sort of difficulties. So I think that's an example of knowing who you've got. And as soon as you can establish those relationships to understand individual members of staff's interests, enthusiasms, passions, why they are, where they are in life, what's important to them, then you have a way of harnessing that to get the best effect, because they then buy in to what you're doing because they feel that their position, their attitude, their stances counts. Now, I use those words advisedly because if you're talking about different generations, younger members of staff often feel very strongly about particular issues, whereas older members of staff might have had a more generic or general approach to politics or the state of the world or economics, whereas younger people definitely are more issue-driven. And we need to acknowledge how important that is to them and not dismiss it or think it's unimportant, because we're not going to carry them with us if we don't show that level of understanding.
Mm-hmm. And that brings me exactly to the next topic, which is about how do we manage and motivate a Gen Z people, like it's called. I don't really like that much, this expression, but really young people who come to the business world today and who have, like you say, a different view on the world. And for people who are in their 40s, 50s, or 60s, I know it's difficult to motivate people who are 20 or 30 years younger because of this difference in perspective, because we have a very different view of what is normality as well, or what is attractive, for example. And especially in change, we might think, oh, the young people, this must be easy because they're young and flexible and what have you. But I think it has nothing to do with that, because human beings forever already have different types of profiles. And you find in young people change-resistant people as you find them in people of other ages. But I think the perspective on the world is probably different. What do you think about that?
I think the perspective is different, but we've got to be careful. I'm not very keen on labels because I think it's too easy to generalize and to lump a group of people together as one type. And I think it's a wrong approach, because I really do see people as individuals. There are plenty of young people who are not that enamored or that strong as far as technology is concerned, and yet we assume they're all digital natives and they're all far better than we are, who've had to struggle to catch up with it, who are older. So I just give that as but one example. But I think fundamentally for me, this is always about respect. I always tried to teach classes, or I would talk in assemblies as a head teacher and as a manager of people about the need to respect each other's position. If you take the school setting, when you arrive at a school and you're thinking of a child going to this school and perhaps choosing a place there, the first people you meet, the security guard, the receptionist, shape your impressions and opinions. And yet you have a situation where they're often disregarded or seen as not important. And in every one of the institutions, schools, etc., I visit, I always make a point of making clear how interdependent we are. So it starts from that notion of respect. I think it's fundamental. If you can inculcate a sense of respect, then you reduce the likelihood of problems over equality, diversity, inclusion, for example, and help establish that sense of belonging that's important for everyone. Because if you're going to make a success of a business or institution, people need to feel they want to be there. And they only want to be there if they feel included and they feel their opinion counts and that they matter as an individual. So it's very important that managers, senior managers, give that example themselves and model it in all that they do and how they treat people, because it's worth its weight in gold. It means there's an unspoken bond or link as a result. So I think that is very clear, in terms of how people respond to the change that you're trying to introduce. Because when you are introducing change, you have to prepare the ground. Often the mistake is made with generations because it's taken for granted that, you're all going to accept this because this is a new technology thing. And that's not the case, because many people will feel, wait a minute, why are we doing this? Nobody's explained it to me. What's the purpose of it? And it has to be, to some extent, in their language. So talking as if everyone knows what you're talking about is a mistake. And using jargon, acronyms, expressions that you know and I know, but nobody else does, is exclusive, not inclusive. So language is very important. Communication is absolutely key. Most of the problems I deal with and most of the issues about growth or change stem from communication issues. And part of the problem that we have dealing with this is that younger generations want quick decisions, quick responses, quick messages, but they are not always the best. For example, I often quote from history. There was a politician in Britain in the 1920s and 30s called Stanley Baldwin, and he won 3 general elections with the same slogan. His slogan was, "Wait and see." Now, it's a really boring slogan, and he was a really boring person. But people voted for him because he made them feel safe. There was stability. But his advice was right in the sense of wait and see to some extent, because not every problem and not every change has to be introduced at the fastest pace. So there is that aspect that's important of making a judgment. And it's helping people understand that. So how do you communicate it to them? They want to be communicated in a way that's familiar. We all now have this natural extension to our hand, which is the smartphone. It's never out of your hand. People are always looking at it. It's an addiction, if you want to call it that. But it's our quickest way of communicating. So people send WhatsApp messages, other forms of messages, emails, etc., all the time. And many of them are done in a hurry, and they are not really properly thought through. So I think the communication issue is a big part of it. And we have to be mindful that different people and different generations communicate in different ways.
I see that also as a very big challenge, which I see on the one hand in the leadership trainings I do with people of a different age group usually than with the students. I have some students at a business school in Switzerland where I also see that the impatience of getting the information quickly and in a very simplified way is definitely much more there with the young people than with people of a certain age group. And I think there you can see the difference in how people communicate with each other and how they do not then understand each other, because that's all the problem at the end. I also have seen some statistic ones around the number of business mistakes and where they stem from. And it seems that 70% of business mistakes stem from miscommunication, misunderstandings. Because like I said in the very beginning, we all think that when we say something that everybody understands that. And everybody understands also exactly what we intend to say, whereas this different interpretation can be massively different from people from different backgrounds. If you now compare the age diversity that we can have there, because in companies we speak a lot about gender diversity, it's really a bit of on top of the list when it comes to diversity and inclusion. But I also see very often the topic coming up, okay, but what about age diversity? Which is very rich when you have a team that works well together from very different age groups, but it's much more tricky to manage because people at the end of their career have totally disparate aspirations as well, a different level of ambition, maybe a lower level of ambition because you say, I have 5 more years to do. I have seen it all kind of. And then you have younger people who come in and they think they know it all maybe. And then you have this clash between age cultures, basically, which are coming in and references that are different. We reference to very different elements and things that happened in our lives. So we have a different view of the world. And this is so fundamentally different sometimes that it's the origin of our misunderstandings. Imagine you are let's say, 50-year-old leader, and you have always led teams with people your age, 10 years younger, something like that. So you work in a comfort zone in that way. And suddenly you get someone into your team who is 24 years old and who seems to be from a different planet. How do you manage this person? How do you build that relationship? Where do you start from in the West?
I think part of it, the advantage is always working with young people. Because if you're working in education and you're teaching young people, it's energizing. It's also exhausting, but it's energizing in the sense that they have ideas, they have different attitudes, they come at a problem differently. They're looking at it to apply the knowledge they've gained in an exciting and different way. And you can, as you get older, get set in your ways because this is the way you've done things and it's always worked. And that's the enemy of change. And that, of course, means that people tend to give that attitude of, oh, we've always done it that way, or, oh, we tried that 10 years ago. It didn't work then. It won't work now. You have that kind of tired approach. You don't get that with most young people. But I mean, there are plenty of people across the ages who are like that, who are enthusiastic. It's about being open-minded. That's the key. If everyone, regardless of generation, is open-minded, then I'm open to the view as a young person that someone much older than me has got experience that will count and I can learn from. And equally, a senior manager can say, well, I'm open to your new young ideas because this is something we haven't tried and we're stuck in a rut here and we can't make movement as a company or as a business. So it's worth giving a try to your ideas. You know, it's tremendously uplifting. When I was founding a school and interviewing staff, they wanted to know what the job was going to be like. And I said, well, if you've ever had an idea you wanted to implement and couldn't, this is the place to come because you can come and try anything. If it doesn't work, don't worry because it's not life-changing. We just do something else and we can try and learn from your ideas. the best parts and use parts of it. And you could see them visibly lifted because nobody had ever said that to them before. So taking their ideas seriously and giving it weight and not dismissing it out of hand is one tactic. But it is that question of open-mindedness. I've got to say that coming back to Europe, I found a lot less of it here than I did in Asia or in Latin America. And I think that's partly cultural. I think if you're dealing with developing countries, then they're keen to grasp ideas. Is there anything new? Is there anything I could do that maybe will help us grow quicker? Whereas in mature economies and established setups and institutions, people less open to that kind of approach.
And I think we cannot afford this anymore, because we could afford it for the last maybe 20, 30 years, for sure. It worked well, but I think it already does not work anymore. And especially with the changes that are even accelerating, and especially for the business world. We all know that artificial intelligence is all around the corner, and we are already working with it. Some people even work with it without realizing that they have been working with AI. And the change will be even massive, I think. And I don't believe it's a bad change. I think there's, like in any big change that we made through the past 100 years, there was a lot of massive change. We can always find something that is very, very interesting for humanity, and it's up to the whole humanity to steer, into which direction we finally evolve with that. But I think, like you say, it's very important to stay open-minded. And on the one hand, not to assume that younger people embrace AI easily because for them it's super easy because they are digital natives. No, probably it's not. You also have very, very different profiles there. You have also anxiety towards this topic, like you can find generations who feel literally threatened by artificial intelligence. Many people do, because it's this very big unknown area. That's how it feels to us. And people don't like uncertainty. The majority of people actually is very change resistant because they don't like uncertainty, and change is always uncertainty. And so I think, like you say, have this open-minded approach and just ask for ideas, also how they feel about this, not assuming that they must be totally fine with that. I don't have to care about them when it comes to this topic. I think that's one of these assumptions that we make in communication, which are wrong. And when we make wrong assumptions in communication, then we run into a conflict scenario, which is often a silent conflict. It's just a conflict that creates no open discussions, but a lot of frustration, not feeling included, not being motivated anymore, and finally leaving the organization to try out something new. And I think that's what we cannot afford anymore, also in Europe, because it's hard to find great profiles and people who really fit the requirements of the job.
Yes, I think it's been made more difficult, the whole communication piece, because of the growth of social media, because the great growth, for example, of conspiracy theories and adopting certain attitudes, that this business thinks this way, or that leader thinks this way, or this company is associated with anti-environment approaches, whatever the issue might be. When it spreads in social media, it will then cloud your judgment because you've got an attitude before you even start that this is going to be a problem. And that's in both directions. So that you have the senior people institution, all right, you take that stance on that subject, so you're going to be like that on everything. So these other issues will be the same. And likewise, from the younger generation saying, oh, as an older person, you're going to take this view about everything. And it's not true because, despite the fact that quite often I'll be the oldest person in the room, I'm the one who's pushing AI, metaverse, blockchain, you name it. And other people much younger than me are looking, well, I don't think we're ready for that. And I don't think we can look at that. So it's not really about age. It's about attitude. And it's about that fundamental attitude that people strike from the beginning. And that's another extension of the open-mindedness and the respect agenda, because if you're giving people space to have different opinions and different attitudes, then you're validating those and you're giving people a sense that they count and that that carries you very far, as I say, in terms of implementing change. Now, of course, if you have diametrically opposed, fundamentally opposing attitudes, it's difficult to reconcile that. And that's part of what I think is my concern with the growth of social media. And you see the very polarized views that people have taken on even some quite small issues. And you think, well, why are you getting so angry about this when there are other bigger issues in the world? But I do think it's fed by the habits that are being formed in social media, which various countries in the EU is trying to do it collectively, are trying to tackle, because if we don't tackle that from a young age, it's going to become embedded.
Yeah, that's right. And it's very simplified. And the risk is obviously that in social media, everything is targeted. That means you always get more of what you have already. So you are going more and more and more into a tunnel view, into a very simplified view of certain topics, because you just get this one view, something that permanently feeds exactly the same opinion. And I think that is dangerous and can lead to a difficulty in discussions around such a topic. If that topic then for whatever reason is related to your work situation and it comes up there, you might find a relatively closed mindset around it, which is not only like this with young people, because young people, very different ages, consuming social media in very different ways. So you can have people also, I'm 51, my age, who consume a lot of social media and who have quite a tunnel view on certain topics because they get this reconfirmation permanently every single day when they go through the flow. So I think that makes communication, on the one hand, it can be a chance because it creates a lot of different perspectives. But on the other side, these perspectives are very much biased by the input that people get and by the sense for the reality. Because I think there is no such thing as one reality. No. And acknowledging this is the first step to better mutual understanding and to letting other people speak and really think and trying to understand their perspective and instead of just rejecting it because it's a different one. And that is an effort. And I think in daily leadership, it is an effort to take that time to listen also to opinions that sound totally awkward to you because it comes from another planet in your eyes, and still taking that time to trying to understand and to get into a constructive discussion about that. Because then also in the change situation or the change project that you might have to run together, you can start building that relationship that leads to a better collaboration. And all you need in change is a certain level of trust, because change as such is already creating a lot of instability. So where else can you find stability than in the human relations, in the change? Because that is maybe the only stable thing that you can create in an organizational change, for example.
Well, I mean, as a teacher, what I used to enjoy running as an extracurricular club after school was the public speaking and debating, because, and we also introduced courses in philosophy, for example, in school. And both of those, what they were able to do was to encourage critical thinking, because to stand up in the debate and be able to give your views on a subject and defend them against all comers, people who are challenging you and asking you difficult questions, is a really important skill. And one of the things you do in teaching debating is also to stand up and be persuasive in favor of a topic you don't agree with. So to be able to persuade an audience that you actually think this way when you think the opposite is incredibly useful, because what it does in adulthood is allow you to see different sides of an argument or a situation. So you tend then, when, for example, I'm sitting in a workshop training, I do find myself mentally challenging what the speaker says. You know, how do I know that what you're saying actually works? And where's the evidence and where's the proof? And show me the evidence and then I can believe it. So it's very much developing those skills. And I think it's really important we do that. But a lot of people have never had that opportunity and they've not really developed that way of critical thinking. It's really important. I think even more important in current society to develop that. So we do put a lot of emphasis on critical thinking skills. And it's then a question of applying it to the given situation in that open-minded way. So it's not easy to do, but it certainly, I think, goes a long way to helping people understand the different perspectives and not dismiss them out of hand.
Mhm. Which is always a shortcut and an easy way in the first place, but then you pay it later because the productivity is not coming in, because the collaboration is not happening, and the whole motivation actually goes down of the whole team at the end. So yeah, I think to wrap up a bit what we have discussed, it's really about adapting to the different people in front of you without, as much as you can, without the bias that we might have in terms of people of that age are like this and people of the other age are like that. And whatever other biases we have, a lot of biases, obviously, when it comes to the identities of people, to their cultural backgrounds, to their gender, and what have you. So we all have quite fixed images in our head how people are, or based on an experience that we have had with someone like that in the past, for example, and we expect it to happen again in the same time. And I think what you said, probably the most important point, is this open-mindedness from both sides. So that you do not expect just from younger people to be open-minded because they should be, because they have to learn things, because they have no experience, yeah. But that you have to do it yourself. Because why should they be like that if you're not even role modeling it as a leader? So you need to role model this thing and start being open-minded yourself and truly curious also in asking what is their perspective on that. Because they might not want to express it by themselves proactively. They might not have been brought up in a way or learned even at school. I know in some emerging markets in school, you just have to sit down and listen and you do not speak to the professor. It's forbidden. So obviously it can be then difficult for people who are coming from a university like that, where they had no right to speak up, suddenly to speak up in companies and come in with ideas and have the courage to say things. So I think there are a lot of aspects to this which are complex, and there's no one size fits all for that, for sure. But one thing really I think to retain is the open-mindedness and the adaptability that is needed.
Well, I like your use of the word curious because I think that is at the heart of it. You know, in the Nord Anglia schools, we have a collaboration with MIT, and I remember one of their challenges was to ask all the children aged 3 to 18 in our schools, what are you curious about? And so in the school I was in at the time, we had 800 children in the school, and we covered the entrance to the school with the post-its of each child's idea. Absolutely fascinating. You know, one child wanted to know, why do we have space? And he meant both space around you and outer space. And that was an interesting discussion in itself. And a lovely one from another, I think the child was 5 or 6. Does a dog have a soul? And that led to a big discussion about soul. What is soul? And how would you know if a dog had, and what sign would you have? But my point in giving that example is, at that age, there are no inhibitions. You can think anything. You can see it as lateral thinking. You can see it as off the wall, however you want to describe it. But the point is, it's curious about what is around you. And it's about looking at the problems you see in the world and solving them in a different way. And you can only do that through curiosity. This is how we've made any invention. This is how we've got AI as well, for that matter. But any invention has come about because somebody said, I wonder what would happen if I did this, or if we changed that, what would happen next? And I think that's the fascinating part of what we're facing, is that journey of curiosity.
Yeah, thank you very much, Brian. And I think it was a fantastic last word and something to retain for all of us, because it will bring us to a different place, because curiosity always leads to learning. So thank you very much for the very insightful discussion.
Thank you for the opportunity. I wish you well.
Thanks for tuning into Leading Change Conversations today. If you want to improve your own skills on leading change or communicating more effectively, check out my courses for individuals on my website. I propose a bunch of useful online live classes, really nice short snippets of 90 minutes around overcoming procrastination, surmounting change resistance, communicating with impact, or influencing through presence. So until next time, keep leading, keep learning, and making a difference.